Is that one part? The one part of your critique is that President Biden tempted Vladimir Putin to achieve what he's always wanted to achieve, which is subjugating Ukraine to a new Russian empire?
Yes, Senator, does. Senator, I'm a big believer in patterns. We all have patterns. We go to the store the same way, buy the same service station, and so do leaders. And Putin saw in the leadership of President Biden a pattern, and he was able to exploit it.
Second, over the year of the war, it sounds to me like your critique is that President Biden and the administration have been pussyfooting around their support for Ukraine. It's constantly providing them just enough to avoid a catastrophic defeat, not enough to win. It's, as you say, a pattern we've seen from the very beginning. We'll give them ammunition, but not artillery. We'll give them artillery, but not HIMARS. We'll give them HIMARS, but not armor. We'll give them Bradleys, but not Abrams. We'll give them Abrams, but not cluster munitions and F-16, which is where we are now. And therefore, he's dragged out the war longer than we should have if we had just provided Ukraine with what it needed to defend its territory from the very beginning. Am I right about that?
You're correct, Senator. Senator, you'll appreciate this. It's like doing a river crossing. Once from the near bank to the far bank, you don't get in the middle on a river crossing. You decide it was not a good idea. Yeah. Once you commit, you go.
And to a point you were making earlier, and Senator Kaine discussed with you, is that President Biden keeps talking about supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, which is a substitute for helping Ukraine win as quick as it can. Is that right?
I believe so, because if this goes to a long-range fight, it's an endless war, and they cannot win a war of attrition.
Yeah, so from the beginning, it shouldn't have been about supporting Ukraine as long as it takes. It should be helping them win as quick as they can. For the record, Senator Kaine talked a lot about seeing through the rearview mirror. I think you were making these very points a year ago, weren't you, when you were looking through the windshield, not the rearview mirror?
Correct, sir.
I think a lot of us were. And then the third critique, after the first one, that President Biden tempted Vladimir Putin to go for the jugular, and then he spent a year pussyfooting around in its support for Ukraine, is that he's also allowed Europe to get away without doing enough, especially on financial support, and in particular, Germany, France, and the European Union. Is that right?
I believe Europe has been very lagged.
Okay. Now, I also hear you making a few other points as well that I want to pursue. Sometimes we hear criticism of President Biden that he seems to care more about Ukraine's borders than America's borders. I think that's a fair criticism of President Biden. But it sounds like you believe that it's the case that you can care about America's borders and protect our borders while also help other countries protect their borders too. Is that right?
That is correct, Senator.
Or recently, since the terrible train wreck in East Palestine, Ohio, and President Biden's trip to Kyiv last week, I've heard some say that the president will go to Kyiv, but he won't go to East Palestine. I agree, that's a fair criticism of President Biden. It sounds to me like you think it's possible to both go to East Palestine and support the people there who've been harmed by this train wreck, but also travel to Kyiv and show our support for the Ukrainian people in their fight against this war of aggression from Russia. Is that right?
My experience is that Air Force One can about go anywhere it wants to go.
Thank you for that. Now, in negotiations, we also hear a lot of criticism that we're not doing enough to have a negotiated end to this conflict, that we need to get negotiations underway. I think one of your key points in terms of supporting Ukraine now, backing them to the hilt as quick as we can, not for as long as it takes, is that the only way to get a negotiated settlement is to convince Vladimir Putin he has more to lose on the battlefield than he does at the negotiating table. Is that right?
That's correct, Senator. And what you need to push pressure on him, if he loses his army, he loses. And that's what you put him at risk of.
So this idea that, well, if we stop supporting Ukraine or if we gradually draw down our support for Ukraine, then we'll magically have a negotiated settlement that protects America's interests. What you're saying is that, no, what we would do is further embolden Vladimir Putin, exactly what Joe Biden did in 2021, to try to achieve maximalist gains, first in Ukraine and then down the road against NATO partners. Is that right?
That's correct, Senator. It's fool's gold if you think you can reduce aid.
Okay.